There are moments in life when we feel as though the script has already been written, as though the lines have been etched upon our days and cannot be altered. We wake, we labor, we struggle, and we go to bed believing tomorrow will look like yesterday. Yet this is an illusion, for God is never finished with us. The author of the universe is still holding the pen, and he does not leave a story half-told. Think of how often the greatest turning points come not with fanfare, but quietly. A carpenter working in Nazareth had no idea his life was about to alter the world. A shepherd boy named David never suspected that his sling would set him on a throne. The transformation of their stories did not begin with them. It began with the one who saw further than their own eyes could reach. We may think our story is too tangled for God to rewrite. We may believe our mistakes have scarred the page so deeply that nothing beautiful can be made of it again. Yet it is often the scarred parchment that the light shines through most clearly. What seems to us a disaster is sometimes the very soil in which hope begins to grow. God does not discard broken chapters. He redeems them, weaving even the darkest strands into a tapestry that reveals his glory. Imagine reading a book where the hero never faces trial, never wrestles with doubt, never walks through shadow. Such a story would be hollow, unworthy of our attention. But when the hero stumbles and rises, when the villain seems to have the upper hand, when despair hovers like a cloud, then we lean forward, eager for resolution. Your life, too, is written with tension and conflict, not to break you, but to prepare you for the moment when the author turns the page and writes redemption across your name. Do not measure your life only by what you see today. The same God who called light out of darkness can speak into your situation. The same God who rolled away the stone can roll away the weight that presses upon your soul. You may feel hidden, overlooked, or forgotten, but there is no corner of existence unseen by his eye. Even in the silence he is at work, arranging the next chapter, and when God moves, the shift can be sudden. The fisherman leaves his nets in an instant, the prisoner walks free at midnight, the blind man sees with a touch. In a single breath stories are rewritten. What seemed final proves temporary, what seemed hopeless becomes radiant with promise. Perhaps your story has been one of struggle, of waiting, of unanswered questions. But take courage. Waiting is never wasted when it is placed in God's hands. The delay itself may be part of the preparation, shaping your heart so that when the change comes, you are ready to carry the weight of blessing. So hold fast. Your author has not abandoned the story. He is getting ready to write something new, something beyond what you have imagined. And when he does, you will see that every page, even the ones that pained you, had a purpose. The same God who began your story is faithful to complete it, and when he changes it, it will not merely be for your good, but for his glory. God never leaves a story unfinished. The author of life is still writing, and what feels final to you may only be the turning of a page. When we think of stories, we imagine them with beginnings, middles, and ends. We turn the pages of a book, we listen to the unfolding of a tale, and there is something in us that longs for resolution. Yet in life, we often imagine that the story is already set, that what has been written cannot be altered, that the pattern of our days will remain unchanged. We wake up to the same routines, the same struggles, the same disappointments, and it seems that life is repeating itself in an endless cycle. But there is a truth greater than our perception. God never leaves a story unfinished. The author of life is still writing, and even when we cannot see his hand, he is guiding the pen with purpose. What looks to us like the conclusion may only be the prelude to something far greater. It is easy to believe that the chapters of our past have already determined our future. We think that failures have marked us too deeply, that missed opportunities cannot return, that wounds cannot heal. But God does not measure our lives by our missteps. He does not see the brokenness and decide to set the book aside, unfinished and abandoned. Instead, he takes what seems shattered and weaves it into something meaningful. The very parts we wish could be erased are often the parts he uses most powerfully. Just as an author uses conflict to drive a story forward, God uses trials and difficulties to move us toward a greater destiny. What feels like the end may only be the middle, and the middle is never the whole story. Consider how often in history the greatest stories seem to end in hopelessness, only to be rewritten by God's hand. The Israelites, trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army, surely believed their story was finished. They were caught between death behind them and impossibility before them, and there was no human way out. Yet that was not the end. It was the very moment God chose to reveal his power by parting the sea. What looked like the closing of their story became the opening of a new chapter of freedom. The cross itself seemed like the end of the story for the disciples. The one they had followed was dead, buried, sealed in a tomb, but the author of salvation was not done. 3 days later, the stone was rolled away, and the story that seemed to end in despair became the story of victory and eternal life. The temptation we face is to judge the story by the page we are on. If the page is painful, we assume the book is tragic. If the page is dark, we imagine the whole narrative is without light. Yet the author sees beyond the page we are living. He knows how the next line will be written. He knows what chapter is coming. What we see as the end is only the middle, and in his timing he reveals that he is still writing. Sometimes the silence of God feels like abandonment, as though he has set down the pen and left us waiting in the unfinished space between chapters. But silence is not the absence of the author, it is part of the writing. Even in silence, God is preparing. Just as the blank space between paragraphs is not wasted, the seasons of waiting in our lives are not without meaning. They are pauses that give weight to what is coming next. They are the breath before the next word, the stillness before the new chapter begins. We must remember that no author writes a story without knowing where it is going. Even when the characters themselves are confused, uncertain, or despairing, the author sees the ending from the beginning. In the same way, God knows the outcome of your story. He knows what you cannot see. He is not surprised by your failures, not defeated by your circumstances, not hindered by your past. He holds the entire narrative in his hand, and he is working all things together for the conclusion he has already written. What may feel to you like a cruel ending may actually be the setup for transformation. Sometimes, in order for a story to be changed, it must first reach a breaking point. The chapter must reach a place of tension so that the resolution will shine all the brighter. When everything seems lost, when there is no way forward, when we feel as though the pen has been dropped, that is when God takes up the story in a way we could not have imagined. He writes beauty where we saw only ashes. He writes redemption where we saw only loss. He writes hope where we thought there was none. We are quick to close the book on ourselves, to decide that the mistakes we have made, the pain we have endured, or the failures we have faced have defined us. But God refuses to close the book until he has finished the work he began. He has promised to complete what he started, and his promises are not broken. What he begins, he brings to fulfillment. What he writes, he completes. And because he is the author, no one else has the authority to end your story prematurely. The beauty of God's authorship is that he writes not merely with ink on paper, but with eternity in mind. Every chapter of your life, even the ones you regret, are being used in the greater narrative of his purpose. He is not rushed, nor is he careless. He writes with precision, with love, with wisdom that far exceeds our understanding. And when we trust him, we find that the chapters we feared most often become the very ones that display his grace most clearly. God never leaves a story unfinished. Even when it seems to us that the conclusion has already come, he surprises us with new beginnings. He turns the page when we thought the book was over. He redeems what we thought was lost. And in the end, when we see the full story, we will know that every word, every line, every chapter had meaning and was written with his hand. Your scars are not wasted. God redeems broken chapters and uses them as part of his greater design. Your scars are not wasted, though the world often teaches us to hide them, to cover them, to pretend they do not exist. We imagine that perfection is what brings value, that smoothness without blemish is what makes something beautiful. Yet God sees differently. To him, the scar is not a mark of defeat but of survival, not a blemish but a testimony. It is proof that though we were wounded, we were not destroyed, though we were broken, we were not abandoned. Every scar, visible or hidden, tells a story of pain endured, of lessons learned, of strength discovered, and of grace received. What we see as disfigurement, God sees as material for redemption. When we look at our own scars, we often feel shame. We remember the choices that led us into valleys we never wanted to walk, the mistakes that left us bleeding, the betrayals that cut deeply into our souls. We trace the outlines of those memories and feel as though they disqualify us from anything greater. We believe our lives would be more useful if they were unmarked, pure, unbroken. But the truth is quite the opposite. It is often through scars that light shines most brilliantly. A glass without a crack will reflect, but a glass that has been broken and pieced together again refracts the light into colors unseen before. So too, the life that has been wounded and healed reflects God's glory in ways that a life without struggle never could. Consider how the risen Christ, after conquering death itself, did not erase the scars of his crucifixion. When he appeared to his disciples, it was his wounds that identified him. He held out his hands and his side, not as reminders of defeat, but as evidence of victory. Those scars were the eternal testimony of what love had accomplished, proof that suffering had been transformed into salvation. If the Son of God did not despise his scars, why should we despise ours? What he carries in glory, we too can carry with honor. For our scars are not signs of weakness, but of battles overcome by his grace. It is a mystery to us why God allows pain, why he permits wounds that sometimes take years to heal. Yet it is often in the breaking that the greatest shaping occurs. The clay must be pressed, molded, sometimes shattered and remade before it becomes a vessel worthy of holding treasure. Our lives are no different. The places where we have been wounded are often the very places where God pours in his strength. The cracks become channels through which his love flows, not only to heal us but to touch others who are broken in the same way. A scar that has been redeemed becomes a source of hope to someone still bleeding, a reminder that healing is possible and that pain does not last forever. Think of how a scar is formed in the body. The wound begins with rawness, with vulnerability, with pain that feels unbearable. Yet as time passes, the body does its quiet work of repairing. New tissue grows, not identical to what was there before, but stronger in its own way. The wound does not vanish, it leaves a mark, and yet that mark is not the wound itself. It is the evidence that healing has taken place. Spiritually, the same process occurs. We are wounded by sin, by betrayal, by loss, and the rawness of it cuts to the core. But God, in his mercy, begins the work of healing. He applies grace like a balm. He restores what has been torn, and though the memory remains, it no longer bleeds. What is left is the scar, not as a reminder of endless pain, but as a symbol of survival and a testament to the healer's touch. We may long for lives without scars, but such lives are not truly human. To live in this world is to be marked, and yet the mark is not the end of the story. In fact, it is the mark that reveals God's power most clearly. The person who has never fallen may not understand the depth of grace. The one who has never mourned may not grasp the depth of comfort. The one who has never been broken may never know the joy of being made whole. Scars are the evidence that we have walked through fire and have not been consumed, that we have passed through waters and have not drowned, that the hand of God has held us when we thought we could not endure. The enemy would have us believe that scars disqualify us, that because we have been wounded we are no longer worthy of God's calling, but the opposite is true. Scars do not disqualify us, they prepare us. They make us vessels of compassion, they teach us humility, they strip away illusions of self-sufficiency and leave us with the truth that every breath, every step, every victory is a gift of grace. The most powerful testimonies often come from those who have been marked most deeply, for their lives declare with unmistakable force that God is able to restore what seemed beyond repair. There is something sacred about the scar, for it is where God's mercy has met our pain. It is where his strength has met our weakness. It is where his love has entered the deepest places of our hurt and brought forth life again. To look at a scar is to see a battlefield where God has already won. It is to see a place where darkness tried to destroy but failed, where suffering tried to silence but could not, where despair tried to end the story but was interrupted by hope. and when we surrender our scars to God, they become not only personal reminders, but also instruments of ministry. The very thing we once hid becomes the testimony we share. The one who has walked through grief becomes a comfort to others who mourn. The one who has been delivered from addiction becomes a voice of freedom to those still bound. The one who has been healed of shame becomes a beacon of acceptance for those who feel unworthy. Scars in God's hands are never wasted. They are transformed into evidence of His faithfulness and into bridges that connect us with others. It is a humbling thought that the places we wish had never existed in our lives may be the very places God uses most powerfully. Yet this is His way, to take what was meant for harm and turn it for good, to bring beauty from ashes, to make rivers flow in the desert. The scar does not erase the memory of pain, but it reframes it. It tells us that the wound did not destroy us, that grace was greater than the injury, that healing triumphed over harm. And in this way, every scar becomes a word in the story God is still writing, a story that declares His goodness even in the midst of suffering, a story that proves nothing is wasted in the hands of the one who redeems all things. Trials shape the story's beauty. The tension, waiting, and struggles are what prepare you for the moment of transformation. Trials shape the story's beauty in ways we rarely see while we are still inside them. When a trial comes, it feels more like an interruption, an unwelcome storm sweeping through the carefully built order of our lives. It feels like something gone wrong, something that should not have happened, something that could only lead to pain and loss. Yet, time and again, we discover that the deepest and most beautiful stories emerge not from lives of ease, but from lives shaped by hardship. The very struggles we would erase if we could are often the very ones that give our stories depth, weight, and meaning. No one would read a story in which nothing ever went wrong, in which the hero never faced danger, never suffered, never struggled. Such a tale would be flat and empty, devoid of tension, devoid of triumph. The trials, the obstacles, the moments when all seems lost, these are what make the story worth telling. In the same way, God uses trials in our lives not as meaningless cruelties, but as essential threads in the fabric of our journey. They are the places where character is forged, where trust is tested, where faith becomes more than a word. When we face trials, we are tempted to think they are detours from the story we should be living. We imagine that the real story is one of success without setbacks, blessings without burdens, victories without battles. But the truth is that the story would not be complete without these very trials. They shape us in ways that ease never could. They deepen our compassion, stretch our endurance, and refine our vision of what truly matters. A life without trials might be comfortable, but it would lack the richness that comes only from having walked through fire and discovered that you are not alone in the flames. Consider the process of refining gold. The raw material as it is found is mixed with impurities. Only through intense heat are those impurities burned away, leaving behind something pure and radiant. The gold would never shine without the fire. In the same way, our souls are refined through the heat of trials. We do not welcome the fire, but it is the fire that reveals what is lasting and true. Without it, we might remain untested, unproven, unaware of the strength that God has placed within us. With it, we emerge stronger, clearer, more luminous with His presence. Trials also draw us closer to God in ways that seasons of ease rarely do. When everything is smooth, we are tempted to lean on ourselves, to trust in our own abilities, to forget the one who gives us breath. But when the path becomes steep, when the storm rages, when we cannot see a way forward, then we lift our eyes to the one who holds us. It is often in the valley that we discover the shepherd's nearness, in the darkness that we see the brightness of his light. The very moments we would most like to erase are often the ones where we come to know His faithfulness most deeply. Look at the lives of those who have gone before. Joseph's story seemed to unravel at every turn. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, left in prison. Each chapter looked like defeat, yet each was a trial shaping him for the moment when he would save not only his family but an entire nation. Without the pit, the betrayal, the dungeon, he would never have been prepared for the palace. His trials were not wasted. They were the very soil in which his destiny grew. David, too, was shaped by trials long before he became king. The loneliness of tending sheep, the danger of lions and bears, the ridicule of his brothers, the pursuit of Saul, all of it pressed him into deeper reliance on God. His psalms bear witness to the beauty born of suffering, songs that still lift hearts centuries later. Without the trials, his story would be thin. With them, it became one of the richest ever told. Even the early followers of Christ knew that trials were not obstacles but instruments of grace. Paul spoke of his sufferings as producing endurance, character, and hope. He bore wounds, imprisonment, rejection, and yet he saw in them a greater glory. The trials were not random, they were purposeful. They were chiseling away at everything false so that what remained was something eternal. We may not see the purpose of our trials while we are in them. In fact, often we do not. In the moment they feel senseless, painful, heavy beyond bearing. But when the story unfolds further, we begin to glimpse how those very trials prepared us for what came after. They built in us a strength we did not know we had. They awakened in us a compassion for others walking the same path. They reminded us that joy is not found in the absence of suffering, but in the presence of God. A story's beauty is not in its perfection, but in its redemption. A smooth, unbroken path does not captivate the heart. What moves us is the testimony of those who have been pressed down and have risen again, those who have wept and yet found hope, those who have been wounded and yet discovered healing. Trials give shape to the story in ways that nothing else can. They turn ordinary lives into extraordinary testimonies. We are not shaped by victories alone. We are shaped by the battles it took to reach them. The scars left by trials are not signs of weakness, but of endurance, of having faced the storm and survived. And when we share our stories, it is often the trials, not the triumphs, that resonate most deeply with others. People do not connect to a story of unbroken success. They connect to a story of struggle met with courage, of despair met with faith, of weakness met with divine strength. So though we may not welcome trials, though we may pray for them to pass quickly, let us not forget their place in the story. They are not interruptions, they are chapters of meaning. They are not wasted, they are woven into the beauty of the whole. They shape us into people of resilience, of depth, of compassion, of unshakable faith. They remind us that we are not the authors of our story, but we are held by the one who knows how to use every trial to reveal a greater beauty than we could ever imagine. God works in the unseen even in silence and delay. He is arranging the next chapter beyond what your eyes can see. God works in the unseen, and this truth is both comforting and challenging. It is comforting because it assures us that even when we cannot trace his hand, we can trust his heart. It is challenging because our human desire is always to see, to know, to understand in advance what is happening and why. When silence stretches long and circumstances appear unchanged, we are tempted to believe that nothing is happening at all. Yet much of God's greatest work is done in hiddenness, in places we cannot observe, in ways beyond our comprehension. Just as seeds grow beneath the soil long before any green shoot pushes through the surface, God's purposes are unfolding quietly, invisibly, until the appointed time of revelation. There are countless examples of this truth woven through Scripture. Consider the story of Esther. When she was taken into the palace, no one could see what God was preparing. To her, it may have felt like her life had been disrupted, her future rewritten against her will. Yet behind the scenes, God was positioning her to be a deliverer for her people. For years the pieces moved silently, unnoticed by human eyes. Only in the moment of crisis did the hidden plan come to light, revealing that every detail had been arranged with precision. What looked like coincidence was, in truth, providence working unseen. In our own lives, we often confuse silence with absence. We assume that because we cannot feel God, he is not near. We assume that because we do not see change, nothing is happening. Yet silence is not abandonment. It is often the canvas upon which God paints his greatest works. Just as an artist spends hours sketching outlines invisible to the audience before any paint is laid upon the canvas, God works in ways hidden until the moment of unveiling. The unseen labor is no less real than the visible result. When Israel cried out in Egypt under the weight of slavery, it must have seemed as though their prayers were unheard. For generations they toiled, waiting for deliverance, waiting for change. Yet all the while God was working, a baby hidden in a basket on the Nile, a prince raised in Pharaoh's palace, a fugitive shepherd in Midian being prepared for leadership. All of it was unseen preparation for the day when Moses would stand before Pharaoh and demand freedom. The people could not see it then, but their God was arranging every detail. The unseen hand was moving, and in the fullness of time the plan became clear. We often long for immediate answers, for visible signs, for reassurance we can hold in our hands. But God, in His wisdom, asks us to walk by faith, not by sight. Faith is forged in the unseen. It is in the waiting when no evidence is before us that trust is refined. To believe when we can see is not truly faith. It is certainty. Faith is born when we stand in darkness and still declare that light exists. It is in the unseen seasons that we learn the depth of our reliance on God, that we learn to surrender control, that we learn He is God and we are not. There are times when the unseen work of God is happening within us rather than around us. We may pray for circumstances to change, but God is busy changing our hearts. He is building patience, deepening resilience, stretching our capacity to love, humbling our pride. These inner transformations are hidden, often unnoticed even by ourselves until we are placed in a situation where the fruit is revealed. The person who once lashed out in anger now finds peace rising within. The one who once despaired easily now finds hope refusing to die. These are not sudden miracles, but the result of God's quiet, unseen labor within the soul. Even in nature, God has written this truth. The roots of a tree are unseen, buried deep in the soil, yet they are what hold the tree upright against storm and drought. Without the hidden roots, the visible strength would not endure. In the same way, God grows unseen roots in us, anchoring us in His Word, in His presence, in His love. Others may see only the visible fruit of our lives, but the true strength lies in what is hidden, in what He has been cultivating in secret. There are moments when God hides His work not only from us, but from others as well, shielding us until the right time. A dream, a calling, a purpose may remain in obscurity while He shapes it, protects it, and strengthens it. Just as a child is formed in the hiddenness of the womb before entering the light, so too God often forms His promises in hidden places before revealing them. The unseen season is not wasted. It is preparation for endurance and growth. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, He often compared it to small hidden things, a mustard seed buried in the ground. Yeast mixed into dough, invisible yet transforming the whole. Treasure hidden in a field. These images remind us that the kingdom is at work long before it is visible. Its power is not in spectacle, but in quiet transformation. What begins unseen grows into something undeniable. The unseen is also where God answers prayers in ways we may not immediately recognize. How many times have we prayed for doors to open or for protection without realizing that the doors He closed were the very means of keeping us safe? How many dangers have we been spared that we never knew existed? How many times has His unseen hand redirected us, prevented harm, or provided in ways we only understood years later? If we could see the fullness of His unseen work, our hearts would overflow with gratitude beyond words. The challenge is to trust in what we cannot see, to believe that silence is not neglect, that waiting is not abandonment, that hiddenness is not inactivity. God's unseen work is often the most profound. The waiting season becomes a refining season. The silence becomes a sacred space. The unseen becomes the foundation upon which the visible will one day stand. It requires humility to accept that God's ways are higher than ours, that His thoughts stretch beyond our understanding. We want clarity, but He offers mystery. We want timetables, but He offers promises. We want visibility, but He calls us into trust. And yet, again and again, those who have trusted Him discover that the unseen season was not wasted time but holy time, filled with divine activity we could not yet perceive. This is why we are told to walk by faith. For faith is the bridge between the unseen and the seen, the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not visible, The unseen is not emptiness, it is the hidden workshop of God. The silence is not absence, it is the stage being set for revelation. And when the curtain finally rises, we see that the author has been at work all along, writing with wisdom, weaving with love, preparing something greater than we dared to imagine. Change can come suddenly when God decides to act. He can shift your story in an instant, turning despair into victory. Change can come suddenly, and this is one of the most startling realities of life with God. We spend long seasons waiting, praying, laboring, and wondering if anything is ever shifting, if our cries are reaching beyond the ceiling, if the page of our story will ever turn. Time stretches out, silence lingers, hope flickers, and then, in a single breath, God moves. The same life that felt heavy with delay can be altered in a moment. What seemed immovable begins to shift. What felt final is revealed as temporary. This is the mystery of divine timing, that what is long in preparation may be sudden in fulfillment. Scripture is full of these sudden shifts, moments when the ordinary rhythm of life was interrupted by the extraordinary hand of God. Fishermen were casting nets as they had done countless times before when a voice called out. And in that moment their lives turned toward a destiny they could not have imagined. A jailer in Philippi went to bed expecting another night of duty, unaware that before dawn he would encounter freedom, salvation, and transformation through the sudden shaking of prison walls. A man blind from birth sat in darkness day after day until one encounter, one touch, and suddenly he saw. God moves in moments, and when he moves, everything changes. We may believe that change will always be gradual, that it must unfold slowly, step by step, inch by inch, and yes, sometimes it does. Growth can be steady, like the slow unfurling of a flower. But other times, God works in sudden shifts. The flower blooms in an instant, the rain pours after years of drought, the long night breaks into dawn without warning. Both gradual and sudden are part of his rhythm, but when the sudden comes, it is unmistakable. It reminds us that no situation is beyond his reach, no story too stuck to be rewritten, no chain too strong to be broken in a moment. What makes sudden change so difficult to grasp is that it often comes after long periods when nothing seems to happen. Joseph sat in prison for years, forgotten by men, unseen by the world. Day after day passed in sameness, yet one morning he woke as a prisoner, and by evening he was seated at Pharaoh's side as governor of Egypt. The waiting was long, but the change was swift. That is the way of God. Years of silence followed by sudden transformation, and it is in those long waits that our hearts are prepared, so that when the sudden comes, we are ready to carry its weight. There is something humbling in this truth, for it reminds us that we do not control the timetable. We cannot force God's hand, nor can we predict his moment. We may labor and see no fruit, but that does not mean the ground is barren. Beneath the soil, roots are forming. Beneath the surface, life is stirring. Then, when the time is right, what has been hidden bursts forth all at once. To the observer, it looks like an overnight change, but in truth it was the result of hidden preparation all along. The sudden is never random. It is the culmination of what God has been quietly arranging. Our task is to remain faithful during the unseen seasons so that we are ready when the sudden comes. Too often, we grow weary in the waiting and assume nothing will ever shift. But the waiting is part of the story. It shapes us, teaches us endurance, deepens our reliance on God. And then, when the change comes quickly, we find that we have been prepared in ways we did not realize. The patience we learned becomes the strength to carry the blessing. The humility we embraced becomes the safeguard against pride. The trust we cultivated becomes the anchor when sudden change feels overwhelming. Sudden change also reminds us of the power of God's word. When he speaks, creation responds instantly. Let there be light, and light bursts forth. Rise, take up your bed and walk. And strength floods limbs that had never moved. Lazarus, come forth, and death releases its hold. There is no hesitation, no delay, no resistance too strong when the Creator commands. His voice carries authority that transforms in a moment. The same God who spoke worlds into existence still speaks into our stories, and when he does, circumstances yield, hearts are restored, and lives are rewritten in an instant. We often fear sudden change because it feels disruptive. We have learned to adapt to the struggle, to make peace with the waiting, to live with disappointment. Then, when God moves, the shift can feel almost too much to bear. Blessing comes with its own weight, and new seasons bring unfamiliar responsibilities. Yet God does not bring sudden change without also equipping us for it. The years of preparation, the hidden lessons of the waiting, the quiet shaping of our character, all of these are what allow us to step into the sudden without being undone by it. It is important to remember that sudden change does not always look the way we expect. We imagine grand breakthroughs, visible miracles, dramatic interventions. Sometimes the sudden comes in quieter ways. A heart that had carried bitterness suddenly releases it. A door that had been closed for years suddenly opens with ease. A conversation shifts unexpectedly, and reconciliation begins. The sudden does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes with a whisper, and yet the impact is no less profound. Sudden change also keeps us humble, for it reminds us that we are not the authors of our own transformation. We cannot boast of orchestrating what only God could do. When the impossible shifts, when the immovable bends, when the hopeless is infused with life, it is clear that the hand of God has moved. Our role is not to control the timing, but to remain faithful, watchful, and expectant. The sudden will come, not by our striving, but by His command. Perhaps the greatest challenge is to keep believing during the long seasons that precede the sudden. It is easy to grow weary, to let hope die, to assume that nothing will ever change. Yet the sudden moments of Scripture remind us that God's delays are not denials, they are preparation, and just as dawn comes after the darkest night, so too the sudden can come after the longest wait. It is in the very moment we feel least expectant that God often surprises us, overturning despair in an instant, rewriting stories in ways beyond what we imagined. The truth that change can come suddenly teaches us to live in readiness. To wake each day not only enduring but expecting, not only surviving but watching for the moment when God may move. The waiting season has its own lessons, but it is never the final word. At any moment the author can turn the page, and what has been the story of struggle can become the story of breakthrough. What has been the story of silence can become the story of song. What has been the story of bondage can become the story of freedom. This is the way of God, to prepare in secret, to refine in waiting, and then, when the moment is right, to move suddenly and show that no story is beyond His power to change.